Good morning, children. So let's see the lesson, An Angel in Disguise. We saw the author's note. So let us see the first few pages, at least, of An Angel in Disguise today. So we are going to see about an unnamed lady, a dead mother of John, a 12 years old stout lad, and Kate, approximately 10 to 11 years old, an active girl, and Maggie, the youngest of all three, and who is bedridden for past 2 years. It's because she had injured her spine. And then Farmer Jones and Mrs. Ellis as the selfish characters we get to see, and Joe Thompson, the wheelwright. Wheelwright is a person who works with wooden wheels, who makes and mends the wheels, and he is uh, described as a selfless man, no, like very loving and caring. And Mrs. Thompson, who is turned very sour in character or ill tempered, it is only because she was childless. So these are the childless couple we're going to learn about. So this angel in disguise, this is his popular stories, one of his popular stories written by T.S. Arthur in 1851. It is the story of an invalid girl. So, according to the story, the girl is depicted as an invalid. That's because she is bedridden. Each and every need of hers has to be met by somebody or the other. So, about an invalid girl, Maggie, who was abandoned by everybody after the mother's death. And she was taken care of by a childless couple. And it is a tale that tells us how Maggie brings happiness to the family. So, the story, in fact, is a didactic one because it gives you a moral value of how alcoholism can be demonized. And it speaks about temperance. Intemperance destroys family. So those days, that is what he must have felt, the need to write. So for the American middle class American families, respectable at middle class families that were affected by alcoholism, and many were dying. So that is why he wrote this story. So an angel in disguise. Disguise means here you can say camouflaged, a kind of having a different appearance is what we can understand. So let's see the lesson, children. Idleness, vice, and intemperance had done their miserable work, and the dead mother lay cold and still amid her wretched children. So here, the three things that have done their miserable work on a lady, that is idleness, laziness, means vice here. Vice here is immoral and wickedness, and intemperance, lack of self control, and drunkenness. All the three had done their miserable work on that lady, and the dead mother lay cold and still amid her wretched children. Wretched here can say unhappy and abandoned and poor children. On the floor, she is lying cold and dead, still, and amid her, surrounded by her unhappy little children. She had fallen upon the threshold of her own door in a drunken fit. So she had fallen upon the threshold. Threshold here is the doorstep, floor of an entrance to a building. So here she never had any building as such. If you see, I'll show you in the next slide, the village itself was not a very rich one, all middle class family people, but hers was really in poverty. Can make that out. And she had fallen dead upon the threshold of her own door and died in the presence of her frightened little ones. So the little ones, which are 12 years old, 10 years old, and 8 years old, John, Kate, and Maggie. So all the three, they cannot take care of themselves. So they die. And she has fallen dead. It's mainly because of her intemperance and drunkenness. So in a drunken fit, she falls dead. Death touches the spring of a common humanity. So he says that Authors trying to say death doesn't spare whether you are rich or poor, you're a man or a woman. All humanity is afflicted by death. Each and every one of us has to meet our doom, the end. All men and women. So here he means to say all men and women are like flowers blossomed in the spring, and death in the blight that withers these flowers. So that is what death touches the spring of our common humanity, he means. So this woman had been despised, scoffed at, angrily denounced by nearly every man, woman, and child in the village. So nobody spared her because of her indisciplined life. We don't know what she went through. Maybe because of drunkenness. Maybe she had a husband who was a drunkard. And after he died, maybe she found it very difficult to take care of her three children, to feed them and provide them with all the necessary things. So maybe because of that, she had become a drunkard. But she had been despised, hated by everyone in the village, scoffed at, mocked at. They made fun of her and angrily denounced. Denounced here, criticized by nearly everyone in the village. Even the little ones did not spare her. Okay, children. So here, children, death touches the spring of a common humanity. You can mark that as oxymoron because death and spring are mentioned in the same line. So death is end of something. Spring is beginning of something. Okay. So here he means say all men and women are like flowers that blossom in the spring, and death is the blight that withers these flowers. So beginning and end. And then, so everyone used to despise, scoff at, and denounced her very badly. But now, as the fact of her death was passed from lip to lip in subdued tones, pity took the place of anger and sorrow took the place of denunciation. So, what happened now is that she is dead. The fact of her death was passed on from one person to another, passed from lip to lip, from one person to another, that also in subdued tones, quiet and controlled and calmed tones. And then with that, the pity took the place of anger. All those who were angry with her, they turned, they had pity towards this woman, especially on the children. And sorrow took the place of denunciation, the public condemnation. They criticized in the public. So all that changed. Neighbors went hastily to the old tumble down hut. So the neighbors went without any hatred. Now they're going there hastily, quickly to the old tumble down hut. So if there is any death, we will also, even if we had anything against them, we will feel sorry for them, like that only. So I felt sorry for this lady, and they hastily ran to the old tumble down hut. So tumble down hut here, you can say a kind of damaged, ramshackled, all in shatters is what you can say. Hut itself is not a well-built house. So that too, it was tumbled down, almost about to break down any time, in which she had secured, fixed, little more than a place of shelter from summer heats and winter cold. So in that itself, maybe it had four sides, nothing on top. So only a part of it was covered above to protect them from the summer heats and winter cold. And some of the neighbors, they came with grave clothes for a decent interment of the body. So because this lady didn't have anything at all, so they brought decent clothing for a decent burial. Grave clothes here actually a white cloth wrapped around the dead body. So we don't know whether she wanted that because she was not going to be buried in a coffin. A coffin is a box that is where the dead body will be kept and buried. So we don't know whether she will be buried in a coffin along with it, but they brought grave clothes for a decent burial of the body, interment burial, and some with food for the half-starving children, three in number. She had three children, and the three children were starving. So some of the neighbors With a good heart, they brought food for the half starving children. So, children, what we can see, this poem reflected the problems the 19th century American society had been dealing with, mainly alcohol abuse and child labor. And T.S. Arthur was a great proponent of the temperance movement. So, temperance movement was a puritanical movement against alcoholism in 19th century, which sought to curb the evils of liquor, alcoholism. An Angel in Disguise is therefore a social commentary which not only shows the consequences of a social problem, but also hints at how the results of the problem can be mitigated by the love and kindness of people who are willing to take responsibility of the innocent lives that have been destroyed by the alcohol problem. An angel in disguise also acknowledges the fact that most of the actions undertaken by people are based on self interest and that there is a certain degree of hypocrisy lodged between people's actions and their intentions. So, the reason behind the adoption of the children by the farmer, Jones, and Mrs. Ellis is of great significance as it hints at another major social issue of the time, child labor. So they are real hypocrites, is what you can say, showing one face. But what they had in mind was they've got a bound laborers, bound slaves, is what we could understand. So this is how the village would have looked. None of the houses were very big. All of them were living very poor life, and out of which Maggie's or this lady who died, unnamed woman whose house was like a hut, is what we can understand. So this is what happens. This lady falls dead in drunken fit amid her frightened children. So these children standing around and they didn't know what to be done. And all the people, though they scoffed at her and made fun of her and hated her or denounced her publicly, still when they got the news of the lady, they felt pity, and many of them rushed to the hovel with grave clothes or food for the children. So this is what is the grave clothed children, a decent clothing before the burial. And this is the threshold of the house. So she probably wouldn't have had a threshold like this because we learned that she lives in a hut which hardly had covering on top called shelter. So this is to make you understand. Threshold is the entrance of the house. So this is the cemetery, a burial ground, and this is how the Christian burials will take place. In a coffin, they'll keep the body and bury it in under the mud, underground. So some of the neighbors brought food for the half-starving children, 3 in number. Of the 3, John, the oldest, a boy of 12, was a stout lad, able to earn his living with any farmer. So he was able to manage his living. So he was stout lad here means heavy. You can say strong and a very young boy and brave, you can say. And Kate, between 10 and 11, was bright, active child out of whom something clever might be made if she gets into good hands. But poor little Maggie, the youngest one, was hopelessly disease sick because 2 years back, a fall from the window had injured her spine and she had not been able to leave her bed since, except when lifted in the arms of her mother. So 2 years back, she had a fall from her window, and that had injured or hurt her spine, and that made her paralyzed below her hip. So she cannot walk or even to use the washroom. She wants help from her parents or somebody or the other. She cannot do anything on her own. What is to be done with the children? That was the chief question now. The dead mother would go underground and be forever beyond all care and concern of the villagers. But the children must not be left to starve. So somebody in the crowd asked, what is to be done with the children, because that had become the chief or major priority now. Because the dead mother would go underground, that means she would be buried forever beyond all care and concern of the villagers. Now they will completely forget about this lady. But the children must not be left to starve. After considering the matter and taking it over with his wife, Farmer Jones said that he would take John and do well by him. All right. And now that his okay, so Farmer Jones felt that if he takes, he could see that the boy is heavy, brave, strong, and young boy. He could make use of him. So he consults with his wife. Okay, after thinking about it, having a consultation with his wife, he said that he would take John and do well by him, make good use of him in the farm or field. And then now that, so this is Farmer Jones and John. Now that his mother was out of the way, and Mrs. Ellis, who had been looking out for a bound girl, indentured servant, a servant who will be there throughout and will not take any wages for her work, and she can just be fed with whatever they are able to. So she will become a bound laborer for girl, servant for her, and concluded that it would be charitable in her to make choice of Katy, even though she was too young to be of much use for several years. So she was showing off as if she's really good at heart. And though Katie is of no use for another several years, for a few more years, because she is very young, she said that as if she's offering good charity. And she said she would take her. And she also said, I could do much better, I know, said Mrs. Ellis. But as no one seems inclined to take her, nobody is interested or willing or likely to take her, I must act from a sense of duty, expect to have trouble with the child. For she is an undisciplined thing used to having her own way. So these children have been brought up in such a way, they are so undisciplined. So I may have to really work hard with her to bring her in line. So now I offer to take this girl because nobody in the village seems to take her. But no one said, I'll take Maggie. So nobody there in the crowd said, I'll take Maggie. Pitying glances were cast on her worn and wasted form, and thoughts were troubled on her account. So they were just giving her what do you say, pitying glances, sad looks were falling on her every now and then. On what kind of forms? They say, worn and wasted, pale and thin and unhealthy figure. And thoughts were troubled on her account. Everybody had their mind thinking about her, but they were not able to do anything. As I told you, everyone in the village had their own concerns. They were not well to do, I told you. So wan and wasted here, children, pale. It's because for 2 years she is bedridden. If we don't sit in sun for some time, at least a day, for a month or so, if you don't come out to see the sun, you'll become pale. Okay, like the plants that are away from the sunlight will turn yellowish without chlorophyll, like that we will lose our glow, the pink tinge of pink from your face, the glow will be gone. Maybe that's why she looked pale. And mothers brought cast off garments and removing her soiled and ragged clothes, dressed her in clean attire. So some mothers from the neighborhood, they brought waste clothes, in the sense the worn out clothes of their children, waiting to be given away or waiting to get rid of cast off garments, and removing her soiled and ragged clothes. So removed her dirty, old torn clothes and dressed her up in neat, clean attire, clean clothes. The sad eyes and patient face of the little one touched many hearts and even knocked at them for entrance. So the sad eyes, the way she was looking, the patient face of the little one touched many hearts, and even knocked at them, knocking at the hearts, the look, knocking at the hearts for entrance, but none opened to take her in. But none of the hearts opened widely or opened up even slightly to take her in. Who wanted a bedridden child? So nobody was interested in taking a bedridden child because she needs to depend on somebody for every need of hers. So this is Mrs. L is taking Kate away. And this is Maggie bedridden. And now, so somebody there. Take her to the poorhouse, said a rough man of whom the question, what's to be done with Maggie, was asked. Somebody asked, what's to be done with Maggie? And a rough man from the crowd said, take her to the poorhouse. A poorhouse is a place, a building in which extremely poor people could live and be fed. So somebody, when they asked, he said, take her to the poorhouse. Nobody is going to be bothered with her, and nobody has time to bother, concern about her. And one from the crowd says, the poorhouse is a sad place for a sick and helpless child. Because children, poorhouse, you just cannot go and sleep and eat. You may have to do some help. You may have to do some work there to earn your food and care. So she said that. For your child or mine, said the other, lightly speaking, but for this brat, it will prove a blessed change. He's telling, maybe for your child or my child, it will prove to be a sad place. But for this brat, calling this child Maggie, a child who behaved badly, he says it will prove a blessed change. She will be kept clean, have healthy food, and be doctored, which is more than can be said of her past condition. So all she needs is she needs to be kept clean, have healthy food, and be doctored, given medicine every now and then when it is required, which is all the more blessing when you compare her past conditions as that man. So he probably called her a brat because if she behaved well, she wouldn't have had a fall. She wouldn't have had a fall from her window. Why to climb on the window and why to fall down and break the spine is what he would have thought. But little children will have to be naughty. If not, the childhood will be lost. But this child now is that her condition is such. Mother died, and both the brother and sister were taken away, and she's left all alone now. There was reason in that, but still it didn't satisfy. So people felt, okay, fine, what he says is right. But it did not satisfy because the very next day after the death was the day of burial. So nobody was willing to stay back to help that poor child. The day following the day of death was made the day of burial. So the da sounds underline its alliteration. The day following the day of death was made the day of burial. A few neighbors were at the miserable hovel, but none followed the dead cart as it bore the unhonored remains to its pauper grave. So children, those days, they had not only in India, even there, I think they had pauper grave and the rich, the cemetery. So even for the poor, they had a separate graveyard that was called pauper, poor grave. So the very next day, they had taken the body. The funeral rites were carried on. So very few neighbors were at the miserable hovel. So the hovel here, open space, a poor shelter in the small dirty house. They stayed back for some time, but not even one followed the dead cart as it bore the unhonored remains. The unhonored remains here refers to the dead body of that woman, that mother. So here you can write it as metaphor. The dead body is called an unhonored remains. To where? To the pauper's grave. And now, soon after that, Farmer Jones, after the coffin was taken out, okay, children, the body is taken in the coffin. Coffin is the box they make for the dead body to be kept. So after the coffin was taken out, placed John in his wagon and drove away. So he picked up his vehicle, kept John in that, and just had driven away, satisfied that he had done his part. Because he will get a good name from his wife also, because he has earned a laborer who will never question him for any salary or wages. And Mrs. Ellis spoke to Kate with a hurried air. So she spoke very quickly and she says, okay, so this is what the poor house would look like, and that can also be called as alms house. And she says, Mrs. Ellis says, bid your sister goodbye and draw. And before she could give a proper farewell to her sister by hugging and kissing, and drew the tearful children apart, ere scarcely their lips had touched in a sobbing farewell. Whatever it is, they are blood and flesh, sisters, okay, born of a same mother. So she just drew them apart, the tearful children apart, before, you're here, before, scarcely, hardly their lips had touched in a sobbing farewell. Before they could say goodbye properly, she just pulled her, and hastily others also went out. Some glancing at Maggie, some were at least looking at her and feeling pity towards the little girl, and some resolutely refraining from a look until all had gone. So everyone started moving out. Some were glancing at Maggie's side, some resolutely, very cleverly, firmly avoiding the look. They didn't want to even look at her until all had gone. She was all alone. Just beyond the threshold, Joe Thompson, the wheelwright, paused and said to the blacksmith's wife, who was hastening off with the rest. So this wheelwright is Joe Thompson, a person who worked, made or repaired wheels, wooden wheels especially, is what I told you. So now everyone started leaving and Maggie was left all alone. So as this blacksmith's wife was hastening off, leaving the hovel quickly, Joe Thompson, the wheelwright, paused and said to that lady, it's a cruel thing to leave her so. So isn't it a cruel thing that you're just leaving this little baby here and going? And she was also saying, then take her to the poor house. She'll have to go there. Since they've already discussed, she's telling, then you yourself take her to the poor house. She will have to go there, answered the blacksmith's wife, springing away and leaving Joe behind. So before he could say anything, she just swiftly left the place and leaving Joe behind, left him all alone with that little girl. For a little while, the man stood with a puzzled air. Then he turned back and went into the hovel again. Maggie, with painful effort, had raised herself to an upright position and was sitting on the bed, straining her eyes upon the door out of which all had just departed. A vague terror had come into her thin white face. So here, to show the condition that her paleness was not only because of her weakness, it's because she's scared. When you turn scared, you will turn as pale as white sheet, is what we've learned about, as if you've seen some ghosts. So she is worried. She's, after all, 8 years old and nobody's there, all have left. And she just managed to sit up with a painful effort. She just raised and sat in an upright position and was sitting on the bed, straining her eyes, struggling to see at the door out of which all had just departed. A vague terror, a kind of uncertain fear had come into her thin white face. So this is Joe Thompson. And the wheelwright is a tradesman who makes wooden wheels for wagons and carts. So this thin white face to show Maggie's inner condition, to show her paleness. Okay, children. So, oh, Mr. Thompson. So when she was looking out like that, she happens to see only one good soul, Mr. Thompson. So she cried out, catching her suspended breath. Don't leave me here all alone. So, catching her suspended, the inhaled breath that was getting relaxed in a relaxed manner, she said, don't leave me here all alone. Though rough in exterior, Joe Thompson, the wheelwright, had a heart, and it was very tender in some places. So we can say his character, this is the main character of Joe Thompson. He looked rough exterior, but he had a heart, and that heart was very tender, very soft in some places. So they say, the author says that he liked children. It's probably because they never had children. He and his wife, Jane Thompson, who was described as vinegar tempered, both of them never had children. So probably because of that, he loved children and was pleased and was very happy to have them come to his shop, the workshop maybe, where sleds and wagons were made or mended for the village lads without a draft on their hoarded sixpences. Children, you will be given pocket money by your children. So sometimes you use that and you get something that you really require. So these boys, the lads, the village boys, the young ones, they would have had their hoarded expenses, that is, accumulated or stored away money. They used to bring that to repair or make small sledges. Sledges or on a wooden plank, some wheels to play in the roadside. So they used to make either the wagons or sledges for the little ones. But he never used to take money. Without a draft here, without any money, he used to do the help for them. And when little Maggie asked, oh, Mr. Thompson, don't leave me here all alone, he said. No, dear, he answered in a kind voice, going to the bed and stooping down over the child. You shan't be left here alone. So she's sitting on the bed. Probably he's very hefty, tall, and rough. He bent down, stooping down, he bends down to the child's level and said, you shall not be left here all alone. Then he wrapped her with the gentleness almost of a woman in a clean bedclothes which some neighbor had brought. So here, then he wrapped her with the clean bedclothes with the gentleness almost of a woman. All right, children, and lifting her in, and which some neighbor had brought, and lifting her in his strong arms, bore her, carried her out into the air, out of the house, and across the field that lay between the hovel and his home. So, children, here he wrapped her with a gentleness almost of a woman. So, there's wrap is referred to as that of a woman. So, here you can also say that as a metaphor to show that he, in spite of being a man, can have tender parental feeling like those of a mother. So, you can very well make out the hug and the concern of a mother and that of a father. So that's what. So usually women will be soft and tender and caring while carrying the baby, the gentleness. So usually men will not be gentle. That is why it is said like that. So now he thought whatever may come. So he thought he carried her and started walking across the field. So let's see the rest in the next class, children.